Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a bit unexpected. A story about Vikings and their, shall we say, feline fascination. You probably won't survive this if you can't appreciate the charm of a cat curled up by a roaring fire. But in the Viking Age, those little creatures weren't just there for warmth and affection. They were seen as lucky charms, protectors, and, well, pretty indispensable companions. If you think the Vikings had a harsh, battle-hardened life, you're not wrong. But amid the bloodied axes and the stormy seas, there was something softer and, perhaps, a little puffect about their view of the world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your neck of the woods. It's always nice to know how far the Viking love for cats reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's start with something that'll seem like an odd pairing: Vikings and cats. These formidable warriors and explorers, famed for their ferocity in battle and their longships that sliced through the seas, actually had a soft spot for these little creatures. They weren't just something to pet when a Viking was feeling mellow after a long raid. No, they believed cats brought something far more essential: good luck. That's right. Cats were seen as protectors, guardians, and even bringers of fortune. They weren't just cute, they were vital. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Cats were often associated with Freya, the Norse goddess of love, fertility, and beauty. Imagine being a Viking warrior, standing tall with your sword, thinking of how lucky you are to have a cat curled up at your feet or sitting on your ship as you sail through stormy waters. They were symbols of divine protection. Freya, being the goddess of love, would have understood that when you're out there fighting battles, it's nice to have a little support. So, the Viking belief was that Freya's cats carried the goddess's favor, and therefore, by association, so did every cat that roamed around a Viking household. You may be wondering, why cats? Why not dogs or some other creature? Historians still argue whether the choice of cats was purely because of their practical utility, like their skills as rodent hunters, or whether it was a deeper, spiritual connection. But whatever the reason, cats became intertwined with the Vikings' understanding of the world around them. Whether guarding the food supplies in the cold northern winters or sitting with sailors as they braved the high seas, cats had a certain divine favor attached to them. They weren't just kept for companionship, they were sacred. In Viking households, cats were more than pets. They were considered a necessity for keeping things safe. In the harsh northern climates, food was precious, and any sign of it being destroyed by pests was disastrous. Cats were excellent hunters, and in return for their service, they were treated with a respect that many animals rarely enjoyed. This reverence wasn't just practical, it was also deeply tied to their mythological role in Viking culture. Cats' presence in Viking society can be traced back to their role in farming. When a Viking settlement would set up camp or take root somewhere, they needed a way to safeguard their food stores, which were often vulnerable to vermin. The cats, with their sleek bodies and swift movements, were a natural choice. But that's not where the story ends. These cats, having served their purpose on the farm, would often be seen accompanying Viking traders or warriors. Imagine the image of a tough Viking raider with his cat at his side, both braving the unknown seas together. And here's the funny bit. Cats were often seen as a good omen before a raid. When Vikings set off to pillage distant lands, many of them carried cats on their ships. It wasn't just a superstition, they believed that the cats would keep them safe, both on the long journey and during their raids. Maybe it was the warmth of the cat's presence or perhaps the belief that they were under Freya's protection, but having a cat along for the ride was considered a blessing. Can you imagine being a Viking, surrounded by your comrades and the ruggedness of the open sea, and the only sound that calms your nerves is the gentle purring of a cat? So, in a way, cats on Viking ships were like floating symbols of good fortune, silently keeping watch as their Viking companions went about their work. They weren't just there for company, they were practical companions in their own right. They helped keep the ship's food stores safe, and their presence on board was thought to prevent bad luck. Some believe that even today, that superstition lingers. Ever wonder why a cat is so often seen as a symbol of luck? Well, it's not just because of how cute they are. In fact, it was believed that cats had the power to ward off evil spirits. So, in Viking households, having a cat wasn't just about protecting food, it was about protecting the home and its inhabitants. You could say that Vikings were ahead of their time, making sure they had their own little furry security system, even before the age of guard dogs. Historians still argue whether the cat's protective role was as spiritual as it sounds, or if it was more about keeping the rats out of the grain. Either way, their role in Viking culture was integral, and the presence of a cat wasn't just seen as an asset, but a sign that you were favored by the gods. So, in tonight's first section, we've seen that the Vikings had a pretty remarkable relationship with their feline companions. It wasn't just superstition, it was part of a deeper belief in the protection and luck that cats could bring. Whether aboard a ship, guarding a farm, or curling up in front of a roaring fire, these cats were more than just pets, they were lucky charms, divine protectors, and companions that every Viking revered. As we continue our journey through the ancient world of Viking cats, let's take a closer look at the curious role they played during the long voyages across stormy seas. Now, you might imagine Vikings sailing toward foreign shores, axes at the ready, eyes full of fire, with nothing but the wind and the waves around them. But what if I told you there were cats aboard these long ships, quietly prowling the decks, providing some very unexpected company? The idea of a cat on a Viking ship might seem amusing at first, but it wasn't just about having an adorable mascot. Cats, much like their Viking companions, were built for survival, and they had an important job. The Vikings were not the easiest people to impress. These were people who, at the height of their power, had a near-constant state of tension and readiness. They raided, traded, and settled throughout Europe, often on the most dangerous of expeditions. If you were a Viking, the last thing you would need on such voyages was unnecessary superstition. But cats, it seems, were a different story. Historically, Vikings relied on the steady presence of cats for more than just their apparent connection to Freya's divine favor. Cats were pragmatic. When the Vikings embarked on these long and dangerous sea expeditions, they carried cats along to protect their food stores from rats and mice. Imagine yourself aboard one of those long ships, on a voyage that could last months, braving treacherous waters and unpredictable weather. The last thing you wanted was to run out of food, especially when the grain and meat stores were essential for keeping the crew alive. So, it's not surprising that these cats weren't just regarded as sacred animals. They were functional too. Cats, being natural hunters, were vital to the survival of the Vikings' supplies. The presence of these four-legged guardians helped ensure that the food was safe from the rodents that might otherwise invade the ship's stores. Now, of course, this wasn't the only reason cats were brought along, but it certainly played a part. But beyond the practical, there was the belief that these cats were favored by the gods, and that their presence aboard would bring about good fortune and ward off bad spirits. In fact, some historians argue that the presence of cats on Viking ships was both a practical and spiritual act. While the Vikings were known for their brutal raids and practicalities, they also had an undeniable spiritual side. They were deeply connected to the gods and believed that their actions were constantly influenced by the forces of the universe. So, to have a cat aboard wasn't just a random choice. It was an offering of sorts to the gods, to ensure their protection as they sailed across the seas. But wait, there's more to this cat story. Vikings, being resourceful as ever, didn't just rely on cats for the mundane purpose of pest control. Cats were also seen as guardians of the ship's crew. You see, the Vikings were not only fierce warriors but also deeply superstitious. It was believed that the presence of cats aboard the ship could protect the crew from harm, particularly from supernatural forces. Sailors, in particular, were known to be a superstitious bunch, and the sea was often seen as a domain inhabited by spirits and mysterious creatures. If you were a Viking warrior, the idea of facing sea monsters, storms, or worse, unseen forces, was unnerving. But having a cat on board was thought to shield the crew from the worst of these malevolent forces. Historically, superstitions surrounding cats, particularly the black ones, were widespread. The Vikings were no different. In their eyes, a black cat was seen as a particularly auspicious omen, one that symbolized protection against dark forces. Cats were not just animals in Viking culture, they were mystical beings imbued with powers that could shield their humans from the dangers of the world. Now, let's look at a more unusual aspect of this dynamic. During Viking voyages, cats were treated with a great deal of respect. Imagine being one of those sailors, and there, among the rough and tumble of the men, the salty air, and the relentless rocking of the boat, you'd see the cat, calm, serene, and slightly aloof, sitting there, undisturbed by the chaos around it. The contrast was uncanny. Here were these mighty warriors, steeped in the harsh realities of war and exploration, yet a small creature like a cat could command a certain peace. In fact, some Viking myths suggest that cats were so revered that even during times of danger, the crew would stop what they were doing to ensure the cat was safe. Imagine that, pausing mid-battle or mid-raid to protect a cat. It's not exactly what you'd expect from the fierce Viking stereotype, but it illustrates just how much these cats were regarded as sacred beings. In Viking culture, there was a fine line between practicality and belief. Cats served both purposes. They were essential in protecting the food stores and ensuring the survival of the crew, but they were also regarded as powerful symbols of Freya's blessings, of divine protection, and of good luck. They weren't just any animals. They were special, and the Vikings understood that. Historians still argue whether cats were universally adored or if their role was sometimes exaggerated for mythological reasons. Some believe that, over time, the Vikings' reverence for these animals was romanticized, particularly by later generations who sought to draw connections between the Vikings and divine protection. But one thing is clear, cats on Viking ships weren't just along for the ride. They played a key role in keeping the crew safe and ensuring that their voyages were fruitful. As we step forward in our journey tonight, let's imagine for a moment what it might have been like to be aboard one of those Viking longships. The wind would whip through your hair, the sound of the waves crashing against the hull of the ship, the salty air biting at your skin, and in the midst of all that, there's the comforting presence of a cat. Whether curled up in a corner or pacing the decks, it wasn't just there for companionship. It was there to ensure that the gods were watching over you. It was your good luck charm. Let's keep moving forward in our exploration of Viking cats. By now, you're probably starting to see that these cats weren't just mere companions. They had a larger purpose in Viking society. They were seen as essential, not just for their practical roles but because they held symbolic weight in Viking culture. Now, we'll shift our focus to a more important aspect, how these cats were regarded within the framework of Viking beliefs and mythologies. The Viking worldview was deeply entwined with the presence of gods, spirits, and supernatural forces. The Vikings were not just fierce warriors, they were also deeply spiritual people. They believed that their actions, battles, and daily routines were guided by the will of the gods. And this is where the connection between cats and the divine starts to come into sharper focus. For the Vikings, the presence of a cat was seen as a good omen, tied directly to Freya, the Norse goddess of love, fertility, and most importantly for tonight's tale, cats. Freya's chariot, pulled by two massive cats, was one of the most well-known symbols in Norse mythology. It's often said that Freya's chariot, drawn by these cats, would fly across the sky during the day, carrying her wherever she wished to go. The image of Freya and her cats was so powerful that it permeated Viking society. Cats, as divine creatures linked to the goddess herself, were regarded with reverence, almost like miniature deities in their own right. As a Viking warrior or farmer, owning a cat meant that you were under Freya's protection. This belief wasn't just limited to the spiritual elite, it permeated every level of Viking society. Ordinary Vikings would keep cats in their homes not just as pets, but as spiritual protectors, a physical manifestation of the goddess's favor. Think about it. To have a cat was to have a slice of Freya's divine energy in your home, watching over you, keeping you safe from harm and misfortune. A small creature with a purr could be your lifeline. This divine connection wasn't just about good fortune. It was also tied to the fertility and abundance that Freya symbolized. It's no accident that Freya, often associated with love and fertility, was so closely linked to the cat. Cats were believed to be bringers of abundance and prosperity, much like the goddess herself. This connection between cats and fertility was so strong that it extended beyond just the harvests or the crops in the fields. It was said that Freya's cats had the ability to bless the home with prosperity in every aspect, be it in the form of abundant food, a fruitful marriage, or even a successful raid. So, if you were a Viking with a cat at home, you could consider yourself doubly blessed, both with the practical gifts the cat offered and with the divine favor of Freya herself. But the divine role of cats didn't stop there. The relationship between Freya's chariot and her cats also had deeper implications for Viking rituals. During festivals, especially those connected to Freya, cats were often honored. Cats would sometimes be adorned with special flowers or wreaths, and in some cases, the cats were even given offerings in the form of food or special treats, as if to keep them content. In a way, these little creatures were at the center of a cycle of veneration that reinforced their sacred status. They were not just simple animals, they were conduits to the gods, a link between the mortal world and the divine. Historians still argue whether the reverence for cats in Viking culture was born out of practicality or the influence of Freya's mythology. Some suggest that the Vikings' deep spiritual connection to Freya influenced their relationship with cats, while others believe that it was the cat's practical role as pest controllers that led to their revered status. Whatever the reason, the truth is that the Vikings believed wholeheartedly in the mystical power of cats. They weren't simply creatures that sat in the corner of a Viking hall, looking pretty. They were guardians, bringers of fortune, and, above all, a connection to the gods. It's also important to note that Freya's relationship with cats wasn't just a Viking invention. It was part of a larger tapestry of ancient beliefs surrounding cats in many cultures. From Egypt to Greece, cats were seen as sacred animals, often associated with goddesses or divine protection. But what set the Vikings apart was the integration of this belief into their everyday lives, from the farming fields to the longships cutting through the waves. When we think of Freya's cats today, it might seem like a charming aspect of mythology, but for the Vikings, it was central to how they viewed the world. These cats were more than just a symbol of fertility, they were symbols of divine protection, and their presence in Viking households was a reminder that the gods were always watching over them. Imagine the comfort of knowing that, even in the midst of a fierce storm or a battle with rival raiders, a cat might be there with you, purring softly, offering silent protection and favor from Freya herself. And here's where we encounter something interesting. The notion that a small, simple creature like a cat could hold such power is, in itself, a remarkable reflection of Viking belief. The idea that something so delicate and graceful could be both a fierce protector and a bringer of prosperity challenges our usual ideas of strength and power. But then again, perhaps that's the Viking way, finding strength in the most unlikely places. Vikings believed that their success wasn't just based on their own prowess or strength but also on their connection to the gods. So, having a cat in your home was like having a little piece of the divine right there with you. Whether sailing across treacherous seas, raiding foreign lands, or tending to the farm, the cat was a constant reminder that Freya's favor was on your side. So, imagine yourself in Viking times. You're standing on the edge of a longship, the wind howling in your face, ready to sail off into the unknown. The scent of salt water fills your lungs, and all around you, the men are preparing for the journey ahead. But there, among all the weapons and supplies, there's a cat. Quiet, graceful, and undisturbed by the chaos around it. This small, unassuming creature is more than just company. It's a reminder that you are under the protection of the gods themselves. What a comfort that must have been. As we continue to dive into the unique role of cats in Viking culture, It's important to take a step back and explore how these feline creatures were seen as more than just symbols of divine protection. They also played a significant role in Viking life in more practical and social ways. Sure, they were associated with Freya, and sure, they were thought to bring luck and prosperity, but their value wasn't solely spiritual. Cats were a key part of Viking households, and their presence went far beyond being passive companions. They were active participants in the community, even within the Viking trade network. To understand the role of cats in Viking society, we need to look at how they were integrated into Viking daily life. These weren't just pampered house pets living on the fringes of Viking society. In fact, the relationship between Vikings and their cats was far more utilitarian than we might initially think. Vikings were keenly practical people. They valued what worked and what had tangible benefits. So, when they started bringing cats into their homes, it wasn't just because they were associated with Freya and her divine favor. It was also because these animals served a very real and necessary purpose, namely, keeping their food stores safe. Vikings, much like many ancient civilizations, were heavily dependent on farming for survival. Whether they were growing grain, raising livestock, or fishing, Vikings relied on their stores of food to get them through the harsh winters. But food, especially grain, was a commodity that was often vulnerable to pests, particularly rats and mice. In a world without modern refrigeration or pest control methods, the presence of rats in the food supply was a disaster waiting to happen. Enter the cat. Viking cats were incredibly skilled hunters, and their job was to keep the rodent population under control. This wasn't just an accidental benefit of having cats around. They were specifically kept for their ability to keep the food safe. Imagine a Viking farmer waking up early in the morning, stepping into the cool, misty air, and heading out to his granary, only to find a cat lounging in the corner, its sharp eyes watching over the grain. This was no mere coincidence. The cat's presence was a sign that the grain would be protected. The Vikings, in their practicality, knew that without cats, their stores would be at risk. But cats didn't just protect food. They were also a critical part of Viking trade. The Viking Age was a time of remarkable expansion and commerce, and the Vikings traded with people from all over Europe, Asia, and even North America. Cats were a highly valued commodity in this trade. The Vikings recognized the value of their cats not only for their role in pest control but also for their symbolic and spiritual worth. Cats, especially those linked to the goddess Freya, were seen as valuable possessions. They were traded, given as gifts, and even used as a form of currency in some cases. In Viking trade networks, cats were often exchanged between regions, particularly in Northern Europe and the British Isles. The Vikings, who traveled extensively, would often take their cats along with them on their voyages, ensuring that they always had this precious companion for protection and luck. The exchange of cats also became a form of cultural exchange. As Vikings moved between different territories, they would often share their beliefs about cats, spreading the idea that these animals were divine protectors. This gave cats a unique status as both practical tools and sacred creatures. It's not hard to imagine a Viking trader, upon landing in a new village, presenting a cat as a symbol of good fortune, hoping to win favor in exchange for the trade goods he carried. Historians have debated the extent to which Vikings actively traded cats. While some argue that cats were traded primarily as spiritual symbols, others suggest that they were also practical trading commodities. The Vikings, being a highly resourceful people, would have recognized the value of the cat in both contexts. After all, cats could be both protectors and practical tools. There was no reason not to trade them, especially if they had the added bonus of carrying divine favor. On top of all this, the Vikings also recognized the social value of owning a cat. In Viking society, as in many ancient cultures, wealth and status were often reflected in the kinds of possessions one had. Having a cat was not just about spiritual protection, it was also a sign of affluence. The more cats one had, the wealthier and more powerful one was considered. In some ways, cats were a luxury item, a sign of one's ability to keep the pests away and to maintain a prosperous household. Having a cat was almost like a status symbol, something to be proud of, much like owning fine jewelry or expensive clothing. It wasn't just about the cat's role in the household, it was about the message it sent to the rest of the Viking community. Now, let's pause for a moment and reflect on what this tells us about Viking culture. We often think of the Vikings as fierce, battle-hardened warriors, always focused on the next raid or the next conquest. But as we've seen, they had a more subtle side, one that embraced symbols of protection, luck, and prosperity. The cat, with its silent grace and mystical aura, was a perfect fit for this dual nature of Viking life. It represented the delicate balance between the practical and the spiritual, the fierce and the gentle. In this way, cats were not just practical tools, they were also symbols of the Vikings' connection to the divine, to prosperity, and to the natural world. In this section, we've seen how Vikings didn't just keep cats for superstitious reasons. They relied on them to maintain the balance in their homes and communities. Cats were vital to the survival of Viking settlements, playing both a practical role in protecting food and a symbolic role as divine protectors. They were a form of currency in trade, a sign of wealth and status, and a constant reminder of the Vikings' connection to the divine. So, the next time you spot a cat lounging in the sun, think of the Viking warrior whose life may have been saved by a similar creature, silently guarding the food stores and offering divine protection. Let's continue to explore the fascinating relationship between Vikings and cats, but this time, let's dig into the world of Viking warriors. We've seen how the cats were linked to farming, the divine, and trade, but how did these seemingly delicate creatures fit into the chaotic world of Viking raiders, whose lives were often defined by violence, conquest, and the pursuit of glory? Could a cat, of all things, have a place in the dangerous world of Viking battles? Surprisingly, cats, in their own way, were integral to the Viking warriors' world, though not in the way you might initially think. Viking warriors were not just muscle-bound men swinging swords, they were also superstitious individuals who believed that everything from their dreams to the weather could affect the outcome of their raids. These warriors relied on omens, signs, and yes, even the presence of certain animals, to guide their actions. And this is where the cats come into play. While the Vikings were known for their brutal combat and valor on the battlefield, they also had a deep spiritual connection to the world around them. And just like the cats were tied to Freya's favor, they were also considered a good omen before a battle. Now, here's where things get interesting. The Viking belief in luck, fate, and divine intervention was so deeply ingrained that cats were seen as key players in the outcome of battles. Before a raid, a Viking chief might perform a ritual, and if a cat crossed his path, it was taken as a sign. If the cat appeared to be calm and at ease, the raid would likely be seen as favorable. On the other hand, if the cat acted strangely or seemed agitated, it could be interpreted as a bad omen, a sign that the gods might not be smiling on that particular raid. In this sense, the cat was not just a passive observer, it was an active participant in the raid's success or failure. The connection between cats and warriors was not just about superstition, though. Cats also represented a kind of quiet strength that was valued by the Vikings. A warrior, particularly a chieftain or leader, might see a cat as a model for how to conduct himself in battle, calm, poised, and deadly when needed. The cat was, in many ways, a symbol of the ideal Viking warrior. It wasn't all about brute strength, it was about subtlety, skill, and knowing when to strike. Just as the cat would silently stalk its prey, the Viking warrior would bide his time, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash his fury. This metaphor was not lost on the Vikings, who likely saw the cat's calculated movements as a reflection of their own tactics on the battlefield. Now, let's zoom in on a particularly fascinating aspect of Viking culture: their love of symbolic animals and the power they believed these creatures could hold. The cat was just one of many animals that the Vikings revered for its symbolic value. They also had a deep respect for wolves, ravens, and horses, all of which had important spiritual roles in Viking society. But the cat stood apart, not just because of its divine connection to Freya, but because of its duality. While the wolf and raven were symbols of power and aggression, the cat represented a more refined strength, quiet, patient, and unyielding when necessary. Interestingly, cats were also seen as protectors during battle. Just as they guarded the food stores from pests, they were believed to guard the warriors from spiritual harm. The Vikings were deeply concerned with the idea of protecting their souls as much as their bodies, and they believed that cats had the power to ward off evil spirits and protect against dark forces. This belief was rooted in the idea that Freya, as the goddess of love and fertility, had a special connection to life and death. To have a cat at your side, whether on the battlefield or in your home, was to have a little piece of the divine with you, protecting you from harm, both physical and spiritual. Here's something to ponder. Cats were, in a sense, a bridge between the Vikings' practical life and their spiritual beliefs. While they were valuable for their ability to hunt and protect food stores, they were also seen as bearers of divine favor. This dual role as both a practical and spiritual guardian made them indispensable in the lives of Viking warriors. It wasn't just about survival on the battlefield, it was about ensuring that the gods were watching over you, and that your raid, your conquest, or your journey would succeed with the favor of the divine. But the role of cats in Viking raids wasn't just limited to the warriors. Cats were also believed to bring good fortune to the entire community. Before a Viking village sent its men off to war, the presence of a cat was seen as a way of ensuring that the raid would be successful. The cat would often be the last thing seen before the warriors embarked on their journey, perhaps even the last piece of comfort they would encounter before facing the unknown. Its presence was a reminder that, despite the uncertainty of battle, the gods were with them. Historians still argue about how much of the Vikings' reliance on cats in battle was practical superstition or true belief. Some suggest that it was simply a matter of maintaining morale. After all, the idea of having a divine protector on your side could be a powerful motivator for a warrior. Others believe that cats were genuinely regarded as spiritual beings with real, tangible influence on the outcome of raids. Either way, it's clear that the Vikings had a profound respect for these small, seemingly fragile creatures, and they believed that having a cat on their side could tip the balance in their favor. So, as we move forward in our journey tonight, imagine once again that Viking warrior, standing tall with his sword, shield, and most importantly, his cat. Whether navigating the stormy seas or charging into battle, the cat's quiet presence was a symbol of divine protection and good fortune. The warrior was not just fighting with his own strength and skill, he was fighting with the blessing of Freya herself. In that moment, the cat was not just an animal, it was a guardian, a protector, and an essential part of the Viking warrior's journey. Now that we've explored how cats played an important role in Viking battles and their symbolic connection to Freya, let's shift gears and take a deeper look at one of the more mystical and superstitious aspects of Viking life: the pervasive belief in omens. For the Vikings, the presence of a cat wasn't just a sign of good fortune, it was a spiritual marker, a symbol of guidance from the gods. This wasn't just a trivial belief, omens were taken very seriously, and the actions of animals, particularly cats, were considered powerful indicators of what was to come. As we've discussed, Vikings had a complex relationship with the divine. They believed that their fate was often tied to the whims of the gods, and omens were seen as direct messages from these powerful forces. So, the behavior of a cat could send a clear signal to a Viking about whether a raid would succeed or fail, or whether a period of peace or conflict was on the horizon. This belief in omens was tied directly to Freya and the larger pantheon of Norse gods. Freya's cats were thought to have the ability to communicate with the gods, and by extension, the Vikings believed their own cats could convey divine messages. Imagine a Viking chief, preparing for a raid, standing at the edge of his settlement, eyes fixed on the horizon. Before he steps onto his longship, a cat strolls across his path, seemingly indifferent to the hustle and bustle around it. For most, it would be a harmless interaction, but for a Viking, it could be a profound sign. If the cat walked calmly, it was considered an omen of good fortune. If the cat acted restless or ran away, it was seen as a bad sign, warning that the raid might not go as planned. This type of superstition wasn't limited to raids. Cats, in particular, were often consulted when decisions were being made, whether they were related to battle, farming, or even the arrangement of settlements. But there's more to this. The specific types of behavior exhibited by cats were also important. For example, a cat that was seen grooming itself before a raid might be interpreted as a sign that the warriors should prepare themselves for a calm and successful journey. On the other hand, if a cat was seen frantically scratching or meowing in distress, it could be a warning that trouble lay ahead. Cats' behavior was viewed as an expression of the unseen world, a communication from Freya herself or from the spirits who roamed the land. Historians still argue whether this superstition was widely believed by all Vikings or whether it was a belief held primarily by certain religious or spiritual factions, but it is clear that cats were viewed as being in touch with the supernatural world. In fact, some Vikings even believed that cats had a special connection to the afterlife. Cats were thought to be able to see things that humans couldn't: spirits, ghosts, and perhaps even the souls of the dead. This connection to the spirit world made cats particularly important in Viking rituals, especially those that involved honoring the dead. Cats were believed to guide the spirits of the departed to the afterlife, ensuring that they made it safely across the threshold of the world of the living. In this way, cats were seen as protectors not just in life, but in death too. Interestingly, this belief in cats as spiritual guides and guardians extended beyond the Viking world. In many ancient cultures, cats were associated with the supernatural. In ancient Egypt, for example, cats were revered as protectors of the home and were believed to possess the ability to ward off evil spirits. Similarly, in Celtic and Norse traditions, cats were seen as symbols of mystery and magic, capable of navigating the boundary between the living world and the spirit realm. The Vikings, however, took this belief one step further, integrating cats into their religious rituals and the everyday life of their community. Now, let's think about this from a more practical perspective. If cats were so deeply tied to the supernatural, they would have been more than just a creature to keep pests at bay. They would have been seen as essential protectors in every part of Viking life. As we've seen, cats were valuable on Viking ships, guarding food supplies and keeping spirits at bay. But they were also crucial in more intimate settings, like the family hearth or the home. Vikings would have seen their cats as guardians not just of food, but of the household's well-being. Cats, in their quiet, watchful way, were believed to offer protection against evil spirits, ensuring that the home remained safe, both physically and spiritually. So, picture this: you're a Viking farmer, standing in your home, watching your cat curl up next to the hearth. There's no noise except for the crackling of the fire and the soft purring of the cat, but you know that, in this quiet moment, you're being protected. The cat's presence is a comfort, not just because of its warmth, but because it symbolizes a much larger force at work. In the Viking worldview, every aspect of life was connected to the divine, and having a cat in your home meant that the gods were looking out for you. Historians still debate the extent to which these superstitions shaped Viking society. Some scholars suggest that the role of cats as spiritual guardians was more ceremonial than anything else, perhaps an important part of religious rituals but not necessarily a belief that influenced Viking behavior on a day-to-day basis. Others argue that these beliefs were deeply woven into the fabric of Viking life, affecting everything from the decisions made by warriors before raids to the layout of Viking villages. Either way, it's clear that cats had a profound influence on Viking culture, both spiritually and practically. As we move through this section, I want you to picture yourself once again in Viking times. The presence of a cat in your home isn't just comforting, it's deeply reassuring. It's a reminder that you're not alone, that divine protection is watching over you, both in life and death. The cat's presence, quiet and unassuming, is a symbol of balance, security, and connection to the supernatural forces that guide the Vikings' lives. For them, the cat was far more than a mere pet. It was a trusted guardian, a silent protector, and a link to the gods themselves. As we continue exploring the profound impact that cats had on Viking life, it's time to shift our attention to the more fantastical side of their role. We've already seen how cats were believed to bring good luck, protect food stores, and even shield warriors during raids. But there's another layer to this story, a layer that connects cats to Viking myths and folklore in a way that can only be described as magical. Yes, magical. The connection between cats and the gods, especially Freya, wasn't just symbolic, it was tangible in the world of Viking myths, and it's within these stories that we find some of the most intriguing and peculiar beliefs. Viking mythology, as with many ancient belief systems, was rich in symbolism and allegory. Gods, spirits, and supernatural creatures were everywhere, weaving through the everyday lives of people who sought to explain the world around them. And in this world, cats were more than just animals. They were intermediaries between the divine and the mortal. They were seen as protectors of the home, but also as spiritual guides to a larger, cosmic force. Now, we can't talk about the spiritual connection between cats and the Vikings without diving into one of the most well-known stories, the role of Freya's chariot. The Norse goddess Freya, as we've mentioned, was a powerful and multifaceted deity. She was associated with love, beauty, fertility, and war. But she also had a significant role as a goddess of magic and sorcery. Her chariot, which she used to travel across the skies, was not drawn by horses or powerful steeds as one might expect. Instead, it was pulled by two magnificent cats, known in the sagas as Freya's divine felines. The imagery of Freya's chariot is captivating. Picture this: a glittering chariot being pulled across the vast, dark skies by two mighty cats, their fur shining like the moonlight, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. This image wasn't just a symbol of power and magic, it was a metaphor for the delicate balance between strength and grace, between the divine and the earthly. And it was this image that the Vikings would have had in their minds when they looked at their own cats. These creatures weren't just pets, they were seen as celestial beings, imbued with the power of Freya herself. They were guardians, guides, and protectors, capable of transcending the ordinary world and entering the realm of the gods. Historians and scholars still debate the significance of Freya's cats. Some suggest that they were simply symbolic representations of her power, chosen because of their association with grace, agility, and mystery. Others argue that they represent a deeper, more primal connection to the natural world. Cats, with their stealthy movements and piercing eyes, were creatures that embodied mystery and power, much like Freya herself. The presence of Freya's cats in the Viking imagination would have been more than just a mythological curiosity. It was a reflection of the Vikings' view of the natural world as a place full of divine forces and magical beings. But the link between Freya's cats and Viking culture wasn't just about the gods. It was also about the Vikings' relationship with nature and the world around them. In a time when survival depended on a delicate balance with the land, the sea, and the animals that inhabited both, the Vikings saw cats as both physical protectors and spiritual intermediaries. Cats were hunters, yes, but they were also creatures that connected the mortal realm to the divine. To own a cat was to invite both protection and power into your home. It was a way of connecting with the natural and supernatural forces that govern the world. In Viking sagas and poetry, cats are often depicted in the background of battles, feasts, and other significant events, where their presence is either a subtle reminder of divine favor or an active participant in the unfolding drama. One of the more peculiar stories centers around the idea that a cat's behavior could influence the outcome of a conflict. Imagine a Viking raid, the warriors gathering around a fire, sharpening their weapons, and preparing for the battle ahead. In the midst of all this, a cat strolls into the scene, its movements calm and deliberate. The warriors look at the cat, and its composed nature gives them confidence. They take it as a sign that victory is theirs. In contrast, if the cat seemed agitated, restless, or left the scene altogether, it was considered an omen of bad things to come. Some sagas even recount instances where a cat's sudden disappearance was thought to be a signal that the gods were not with them and that disaster loomed ahead. This connection between the feline's behavior and the fate of Viking warriors speaks to how deeply cats were embedded in the Viking psyche. More than just animals, they were seen as manifestations of divine will, guiding the outcome of even the most crucial moments in Viking life. And here's where the fun part comes in: the Viking belief that cats could communicate with the spirits of the dead. While Freya's cats were associated with the living gods, the Vikings also believed that cats could act as intermediaries to the afterlife. Some sagas describe how cats would wander through the halls of Viking homes at night, their eyes glowing in the dark, sensing the presence of the departed souls. The belief was that these cats had a special connection to the spirit world, guiding lost souls to their final resting place. In a way, cats were seen as the ultimate protectors of the home, not just guarding against pests but also ensuring that the spirits of the ancestors were properly honored and guided safely through the realms of the dead. In Viking burials, cats sometimes accompanied their owners to the afterlife. It wasn't unusual for a Viking to be buried with a cat, especially if they had a deep spiritual connection to the animal. Cats were thought to be the perfect companions in the afterlife, helping their masters transition to the world of the dead, just as they had helped protect them in life. This idea of the cat as a spiritual guide extended beyond mere superstition. It was a deeply ingrained belief that connected the Vikings to the cosmic order, ensuring that their journeys in life and death were as smooth and protected as possible. Let's pause and reflect on the grand scale of this belief system. The Vikings, despite their reputation for ruthlessness and war, were a people who understood the importance of the unseen forces in the world around them. To have a cat by your side wasn't just a stroke of good fortune, it was to have the favor of the gods themselves. Freya's cats were the ultimate symbols of divine protection, of grace in the face of violence, and of the spiritual power that permeated all of Viking life. Cats weren't just lucky, they were the embodiment of Viking values, guiding them through both their battles and their afterlife. That image, steeped in mystery and magic, the cats in their lives weren't just physical creatures, they were messengers, protectors, and guides, with the power to influence the course of events, both in the world of the living and beyond. As we continue our journey through Viking cat lore, we now turn our attention to a fascinating aspect of their relationship with cats: the presence of cats in Viking art and cultural artifacts. Throughout Viking history, art wasn't just a form of decoration, it was deeply tied to the Vikings' spiritual beliefs and worldview. From intricate carvings to elaborate textiles, art served as a window into the Viking soul, revealing their values, beliefs, and perceptions of the world around them. And much like the cats in their homes and on their ships, cats found their way into Viking art, often carrying symbolic meanings that went far beyond their physical form. One of the most striking representations of cats in Viking art is found in the various runestones and carvings that have survived from this time. These ancient stones, often used as memorials or markers, were sometimes adorned with images of cats. These depictions, though not as common as those of wolves, ravens, or other animals, suggest that cats were seen as important symbols in Viking culture. In some cases, cats were depicted alongside warriors or gods, reinforcing their connection to the divine and their status as protectors. Imagine, then, a Viking warrior memorialized in stone, with a cat by his side, its graceful, poised form standing as a silent guardian, watching over the warrior even in death. These depictions were not merely artistic expressions, they were spiritual statements, reminding viewers of the cat's role as a divine protector. In Viking art, cats were often portrayed with great care and detail. Their lithe bodies, sharp eyes, and graceful movements were admired and replicated in the intricate designs of jewelry, textiles, and wood carvings. This attention to detail reflects the Vikings' respect for the cat's beauty and mystery. Cats, in Viking art, were not just animals. They were symbols of the divine, a connection to the gods, and a representation of the natural world's hidden power. The way they were depicted in art suggests that they were seen as much more than simple creatures. They were vessels of magic, embodying both the physical and spiritual worlds. One of the most notable pieces of Viking art that features cats is the famous Gokstad ship, a Viking longship that was discovered in a burial mound in Norway. The Gokstad ship is known for its elaborate carvings and designs, some of which feature stylized animal motifs, including cats. While the exact significance of these carvings remains uncertain, they reflect the Vikings' belief in the power of animals as symbols of protection and divine favor. In this context, the presence of cats on the ship isn't just decorative, it's deeply symbolic, suggesting that the Vikings saw their ships as not just vessels for battle and trade, but also as places where the divine could dwell. The cats carved into the ships were likely seen as guardians, ensuring that the crew would be protected as they sailed off to distant lands. Beyond the realm of stone carvings and ship designs, cats also appeared in Viking textiles, including woven tapestries and embroidered clothing. These textiles often depicted scenes of everyday life, from feasts and battles to agricultural work. In some cases, cats were woven into these designs, either as a symbol of the household or as a representation of divine protection. Cats in Viking textiles were not just decorative elements, they were part of the spiritual fabric of Viking life, symbolizing prosperity, good fortune, and the blessings of the gods. These depictions show us that cats were not just confined to the realm of mythology or superstition, they were deeply embedded in the daily lives of the Vikings, influencing everything from the clothing they wore to the ships they sailed. Interestingly, cats weren't always depicted in the same way in Viking art. In some representations, cats were shown as fierce, almost lion-like creatures, while in others, they were depicted as more domestic and serene. This duality in their depiction reflects the complex relationship that the Vikings had with these animals. On one hand, cats were seen as protectors, strong, fierce, and capable of guarding the household or the ship against any threat. On the other hand, they were also symbols of calm and serenity, offering comfort and divine protection in times of peace. This duality speaks to the Vikings' understanding of the natural world as a place of balance, where strength and grace, power and peace, could coexist in harmony. Beyond art, cats were also featured prominently in Viking mythology and poetry. Viking sagas, which were epic poems recounting the deeds of legendary warriors and gods, often included references to cats, though not always in a central role. In some sagas, cats were seen as symbols of good fortune, bringing luck to the warriors they accompanied. In others, cats were associated with the supernatural world, helping to guide the spirits of the dead to the afterlife or protecting against evil forces. These references to cats in Viking poetry reinforce the idea that they were more than just creatures of the physical world. They were intermediaries between the mortal realm and the divine, acting as messengers and guardians of the gods. In the modern world, we often think of Viking art as focused on the grand and the dramatic, battles, gods, and mythic creatures. But when we look more closely at the role of cats in Viking art and culture, we see that the Vikings also appreciated the quiet, understated strength of the feline. Cats were not just the subjects of legends, they were part of the Vikings' everyday lives, woven into the very fabric of their culture and beliefs. Whether depicted in intricate carvings or woven into the threads of a tapestry, cats were a constant reminder of the divine forces that shaped the Vikings' world. So, let's take a moment to reflect on the larger significance of the cat in Viking life. While we often associate the Vikings with the brutal realities of war and exploration, they were also a people who recognized the power of the smaller, quieter forces in the world: the cats, the gods, the spirits of the earth. Cats were not just creatures of the physical world, they were spiritual guardians, messengers of the gods, and symbols of the Vikings' connection to the divine. They were more than pets, they were woven into the very heart of Viking culture. In the preceding sections, we've explored the spiritual and symbolic role of cats in Viking society. But what about their more tangible, everyday presence in Viking households? What did it mean for a Viking to live alongside a cat in a practical sense? What role did these creatures play in the domestic and social spheres of Viking life? In this section, we'll step away from the divine symbolism and focus on how cats were woven into the daily fabric of Viking culture, where they weren't just mystical guardians or divine agents, but simple companions and valued members of the household. At its core, Viking life was about survival, farming, raiding, trading, and ensuring that the family or community remained strong and prosperous. It was a tough existence, especially in the harsh Nordic climate. Every member of the household had a role to play in keeping things running smoothly, and that included the animals. Just as dogs were used for herding and horses for travel and trade, cats had their own unique, essential role to play in Viking life. As we've already discussed, one of the primary reasons Vikings kept cats was their ability to protect food stores from rodents. In the brutal winters, when food was scarce, losing a grain supply to rats could mean starvation for the entire household. Cats, with their keen hunting instincts, were the perfect solution to this threat. But beyond their role in pest control, cats were also integral to the social structure of Viking communities. Unlike many other animals which were often kept outside or in designated spaces like stables or pens, cats were often welcomed into the heart of the Viking home, particularly into the warmth of the hearth. The hearth, central to Viking life, was a place of warmth, food, and family. It was where stories were shared, meals were prepared, and the family came together after a long day of work. And it was here, in front of the fire, that cats found their place. The cat's quiet presence beside the hearth offered not just companionship, but also a sense of calm and security, something that would have been immensely valuable in a world as volatile and dangerous as the Viking one. One of the reasons why cats were so well suited to this role in Viking households is their unique nature. Unlike dogs, which are often social pack animals, cats are more solitary and independent. This meant that cats could blend seamlessly into the rhythms of Viking life without requiring constant attention. They were not demanding like other domesticated animals, but their presence was deeply appreciated. Their role wasn't as overt as the herding dog or the hunting bird, but in many ways, their quiet, independent nature made them the perfect companion for the often tumultuous life of a Viking. Interestingly, the relationship between Vikings and their cats was not just practical, it was also deeply emotional. While the Vikings were often portrayed as fierce warriors, they had a surprising tenderness when it came to their pets. Vikings were known for their strong bonds with their animals, and this extended to cats as well. Cats were seen as calm and soothing creatures, and their presence was believed to bring a sense of peace to a home, especially after a hard day of labor or a dangerous raid. It wasn't uncommon for Vikings to show affection for their cats, stroking their fur and spending quiet moments with them after long days of work or battle. This bond between Viking families and their cats also extended into the social fabric of the Viking community. In a society that was tightly knit and bound by tradition, animals like cats played an important role in family dynamics. Cats were often considered to be part of the family, and their well-being was closely tied to that of their human companions. It's said that when a Viking family moved to a new settlement or village, they would often bring their cat with them. The idea was that the cat, having already been a part of their home, would help to establish the new household and bring it good fortune. In this way, cats helped to create a sense of stability and continuity in a life that was often full of upheaval. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of the Viking cat's relationship is the way it illustrates the Vikings' broader worldview. The Vikings were a people who saw their lives as interconnected with the natural world, and animals like cats were seen as part of that greater cosmic order. The bond between a Viking and his or her cat wasn't just based on affection, it was part of a larger spiritual belief that animals were essential to the health of the household and the success of the family. Cats were more than just protectors of food and companions by the hearth. They were believed to play a role in maintaining the spiritual balance of the home. One particularly telling example of this is found in Viking funeral rites. When a Viking warrior or chieftain died, it wasn't uncommon for a beloved cat to be included in the burial, sometimes even buried alongside the person. The cat was thought to be an essential companion in the afterlife, helping the deceased navigate the journey to the land of the dead. This belief in the cat's role as a spiritual guide in both life and death speaks volumes about how deeply the Vikings viewed their bond with these creatures. The idea of a cat being buried alongside a Viking leader wasn't just about practicality, it was about ensuring that the person's soul had the right protection and guidance in the afterlife. The cat's presence in the grave was a sign of respect and an acknowledgement of its role as a spiritual companion. Throughout Viking culture, cats were woven into the very fabric of daily life. They were not just seen as divine protectors or omens of good luck, they were valued members of the Viking household, essential in both practical and spiritual terms. From the hearth to the ship, from the farm to the feast, cats were a constant presence in Viking life, embodying the balance between the physical and the supernatural. And this deep connection between Vikings and their cats was not just a passing fad, it was a relationship that spanned generations, lasting long after the Viking Age itself had passed. So, as we reflect on the significance of cats in Viking culture, we see that they were far more than just pets. They were symbols of protection, prosperity, and divine favor. They were companions in both life and death, guiding their human counterparts through the mundane and the mystical. In every aspect of Viking society, from the ships to the homes, cats played an integral role, bridging the gap between the mortal and the divine, between the earthly and the spiritual. The cat was, in many ways, the ultimate Viking companion, a silent, graceful, and powerful guardian, offering protection and luck with every soft step. As we continue this exploration into the Viking world of cats, let's now delve into the more subtle aspects of their role in Viking mythology and daily life. We've seen how cats were revered as divine protectors, linked to Freya and associated with good fortune. But how did these beliefs translate into the more practical sides of Viking life? Beyond their symbolic value, beyond their place in Viking art and mythology, cats had a profound impact on Viking communities, and their relationship with their human companions was anything but one-dimensional. At the heart of Viking life was a deep respect for animals, and while the larger beasts like wolves, horses, and ravens were often seen as symbols of power and aggression, the cat embodied a quieter, more mystical energy that was highly valued. In a society that prized strength, courage, and success in battle, the cat stood as a paradox, fierce in its own right but graceful, silent, and elusive. The Vikings, who revered the supernatural and believed that their fates were intertwined with the divine, saw in cats a perfect balance of both the earthly and spiritual realms. While dogs might have been seen as loyal companions, protectors of the home and warriors in their own right, the cat occupied a unique place as both a guardian and a symbol of divine favor. One particularly interesting aspect of the Viking-cat relationship lies in the importance of cats during Viking feasts and rituals. Vikings were known for their grand feasts, where food, mead, and stories flowed freely. These were times of great socializing and bonding, and the presence of a cat at these gatherings was seen as a sign of prosperity and good luck. Cats, often curling up by the hearth or walking among the guests, became integral to the atmosphere of these gatherings, their quiet presence lending a sense of peace to what could be rowdy and chaotic affairs. Their role at feasts went beyond simply being part of the household. They were seen as participants in the social and spiritual rituals of the community. One of the more intriguing customs surrounding cats during Viking feasts was the offering of food to them as a sign of respect and gratitude. Vikings, known for their generosity, would often share the feast with their cats, giving them a portion of the food as a gesture of thanks for their protective role in the household. This wasn't just about the cat getting a treat, it was a sign that the cats were considered sacred, their presence elevating the ritual and bringing it closer to the divine. By feeding the cats, the Vikings were acknowledging their special status, reinforcing their place as guardians and spiritual protectors. Interestingly, the connection between cats and Viking feasts also points to a larger belief in the interconnectedness of all things in Viking cosmology. The Vikings believed that the world was filled with forces, both seen and unseen, that influenced their lives. The gods, the spirits of the ancestors, and the animals all played roles in shaping their fate. In this context, the cat wasn't just an animal, it was a bridge between the living and the divine. Its role at Viking feasts and ceremonies served as a reminder that all aspects of life were interconnected, and that even the smallest creatures could have a profound impact on the spiritual health of the community. It's worth noting that cats also had a role to play in Viking agricultural practices, though perhaps less romanticized. Viking society was largely agrarian, and farming was at the core of their survival. While Vikings are often remembered for their raids and warrior culture, it's important to remember that they were also skilled farmers who relied heavily on their crops and livestock. Cats were essential in maintaining the delicate balance between humans and the natural world. They kept the rodent population in check, ensuring that the grain and other food stores were safe from destruction. This wasn't just about keeping the food supply secure, it was about maintaining the cycle of life that was so critical to Viking survival. Without cats, the grain stores might have been ruined, crops could have failed, and the entire community would have suffered. However, there's more to the story of cats in Viking agriculture than just pest control. The Vikings believed that animals, including cats, had a deep spiritual connection to the earth and the seasons. Cats were not just workers in the fields, they were seen as protectors of the harvest, ensuring that the food would grow and be plentiful. The ancient Vikings, much like many early cultures, understood the earth as a living entity, and every aspect of life, whether it was planting seeds, tending animals, or harvesting crops, was seen as part of a larger, interconnected system. In this worldview, cats weren't just helping to safeguard the food, they were helping to ensure the prosperity of the entire community, ensuring that the harvest would be bountiful and the cycles of life would continue smoothly. This spiritual connection between cats and the land extended into the Viking belief in the divine power of nature. Freya, the goddess who was most closely associated with cats, was also a goddess of fertility, agriculture, and the cycles of life. It's no coincidence that cats, revered as sacred creatures linked to Freya, were seen as protectors of the agricultural cycle. Their role in the community was as much about maintaining balance and harmony with the natural world as it was about providing protection from rats. The Vikings believed that by keeping their cats healthy and safe, they were also ensuring that the earth itself remained in balance. The influence of Freya's cats in Viking agricultural rituals was particularly evident during harvest festivals. These festivals, which marked the end of the growing season, were times of celebration and gratitude, but they also held deep spiritual significance. The Vikings believed that their harvests were gifts from the gods, and they would often make offerings to Freya, thanking her for her blessings. Cats, as sacred creatures associated with Freya, were often part of these rituals. Some historians suggest that during harvest festivals, cats were adorned with flowers or special garments as a sign of respect. It was thought that by honoring the cats, the Vikings were honoring Freya herself, ensuring that the gods would continue to bless the land and their crops for future seasons. By now, it's clear that cats were not just animals to the Vikings. They were symbols of the natural world, of divine favor, and of the deep connection between the physical and spiritual realms. They played critical roles in every aspect of Viking life, from protecting food stores to guiding souls in the afterlife, from participating in feasts to ensuring bountiful harvests. Cats were not simply companions, they were partners in the Viking quest for balance, prosperity, and divine protection. Whether in the home, on the battlefield, or in the fields, they were the silent guardians, the keepers of fortune, and the mysterious creatures that bridged the worlds of the living and the divine. As we continue our exploration of the Vikings' relationship with cats, let's examine one of the more peculiar aspects of their belief system, the Viking cat curse, a superstitious concept that developed from their reverence for these creatures. While we've seen how cats were deeply revered for their spiritual and practical roles, there was also a darker, more mysterious side to their symbolism. This cat curse, though not widely discussed in historical texts, seems to have arisen as a byproduct of the deep superstitions that surrounded the creatures. It's a fascinating, albeit slightly eerie, concept that adds another layer to the Vikings' complex relationship with their feline companions. The origins of the cat curse are somewhat murky, as there are no written records from the Viking Age explicitly describing it. However, later historical accounts, especially from the Middle Ages, reveal that the idea of a cat curse persisted in Scandinavian folklore. The curse was thought to arise if a person wronged a cat, whether by neglecting it, harming it, or failing to treat it with the reverence that it deserved. In Viking times, such actions were believed to attract the wrath of the gods, and particularly Freya, who was the goddess most closely associated with cats. The idea was that the gods, particularly Freya, would punish those who disrespected or harmed cats by bringing bad luck, illness, or even death. This belief was rooted in the Vikings' understanding of cosmic balance, the idea that every action in the mortal world had spiritual consequences. If a cat was mistreated or cast aside, it was seen as upsetting the divine harmony that the cat symbolized. In this context, the cat curse was not merely a superstition, it was viewed as a divine retribution, an inevitable consequence of violating the sacred bond between humans and these divine creatures. The fear of this curse led to specific rituals and practices that ensured cats were treated with the utmost respect. For example, some Viking communities would hold special ceremonies where offerings were made to the cats in order to keep them content and to prevent any misfortune from befalling the community. These offerings were often in the form of food, or sometimes even specially woven garments, which served both as protection for the cat and as an act of appeasement to the gods. This shows that the Vikings were aware of the delicate balance between honoring the gods through their reverence for cats and the potential consequences of failing to do so. Now, let's think about the psychological and cultural significance of the cat curse. The Vikings, known for their fierce raids and harsh lifestyle, were also a deeply superstitious people. Their world was one where signs, omens, and mystical forces were believed to govern every aspect of their lives. The idea of a curse added a layer of anxiety and fear to the otherwise positive role of the cat in their culture. Imagine a Viking warrior preparing for a raid, only to discover that his cat has disappeared or seems agitated. This would have been seen as an ominous sign, a warning that the gods were not pleased. The curse, in a sense, acted as a reminder of the gods' omnipresent power and their ability to shape the Vikings' fate with the smallest of signs. The idea of the cat curse also connects to the Vikings' belief in fate and the role of spiritual forces in their lives. The Vikings were a people who believed their destinies were shaped by the will of the gods and the spirits. They also believed that they had to live in harmony with these forces, or risk bringing disaster upon themselves. This was especially true in matters of family, home, and community. The cat, as a symbol of divine favor and protection, was a mediator between the mortal and the divine. To upset the natural balance by harming or neglecting a cat was to risk bringing chaos into one's life, a chaos that the gods, particularly Freya, would be quick to exact. Interestingly, the belief in the cat curse also highlights the Vikings' complicated relationship with misfortune. While they revered the gods, they also believed that misfortune was an inevitable part of life. The Vikings were constantly battling the forces of nature, both external and internal, and misfortune was seen as something to be acknowledged but not feared. The cat curse, however, provided a way for the Vikings to control misfortune. By ensuring that their cats were properly honored, they could avoid the wrath of the gods and keep their lives in balance. This reflects the larger Viking worldview, where life was seen as a constant struggle to maintain equilibrium between the forces of order and chaos. Now, we also need to acknowledge that the cat curse wasn't universally believed by all Vikings, and it's likely that, as with many superstitions, it was more prominent in certain regions or among specific communities. Some Vikings may have seen the concept of the curse as a cautionary tale, a way to reinforce the importance of respecting animals and the divine forces at work in their lives. For others, it may have been a more prominent part of their spiritual beliefs, influencing the way they lived and interacted with their cats. Historians still debate the extent to which the cat curse was a widespread belief in Viking society. Some suggest that it was more of a later development in Scandinavian folklore, while others believe it was deeply rooted in Viking culture from the start. But regardless of its historical origins, the idea of the cat curse offers a fascinating glimpse into the Vikings' spiritual worldview. It shows that, despite their fearsome reputation, the Vikings were a people who saw the world around them as filled with spiritual forces that could shape their lives in profound ways. The cat, a creature that seemed so ordinary, was woven into this complex web of spiritual beliefs, serving as a conduit between the mortal and divine worlds. As we reflect on the story of the cat curse, it's important to consider its broader implications. The Vikings' reverence for cats, and their belief in the spiritual consequences of mistreating them, reveals how deeply intertwined their lives were with their understanding of the divine and the natural world. The cat was not just an animal, it was a symbol of divine favor, a guardian of the home, and a spiritual intermediary that bridged the gap between the living and the dead. The Vikings understood the power of these creatures, and the cat curse served as a reminder that the smallest actions could have far-reaching spiritual consequences. To honor the cat was to honor the gods, and to neglect it was to risk divine retribution. As we move into the final stretch of our exploration of Viking cats, let's reflect on how their legacy has influenced modern-day perceptions of these enigmatic creatures. The reverence for cats in Viking society wasn't just a passing phase or a fleeting superstition. The impact of their divine association, their symbolic value, and their role in daily life echoes through to the present day. While we may not see Viking warriors worshipping their cats or consulting them for omens before a battle, the essence of their connection to cats still lingers in modern culture. This section will delve into how the Viking relationship with cats laid the foundation for our ongoing fascination and reverence for these animals, even in today's world. Cats, as we've discussed, were seen as more than just pets by the Vikings. They were divine protectors, guardians of food stores, and spiritual intermediaries. Their role in Viking society went far beyond the practical. They were part of a broader, deeply rooted belief system that saw the natural world and the divine as inextricably linked. Cats, being both guardians of the physical world and protectors of the spiritual realm, occupied a unique space in Viking life. This reverence, rooted in Viking mythology, superstitions, and daily life, has echoed through the centuries, influencing not only other cultures but also the way we view cats today. In modern culture, cats are often seen as mysterious creatures, imbued with an air of mysticism. Their aloofness, grace, and keen hunting instincts make them seem almost otherworldly, which may be why they've so often been associated with supernatural forces. This perception can be traced back to the Vikings, who saw their cats as conduits to the divine. The idea that cats possess a connection to the spiritual world has survived in various forms throughout history, from ancient Egypt to the present day. In Viking culture, cats were believed to be connected to the gods, particularly Freya, and this divine aura continues to color our perception of cats as mystical creatures. In many modern cultures, black cats are still associated with superstitions, particularly with bad luck. This belief can be traced directly back to the Vikings and their reverence for cats. In Viking society, a black cat's appearance was often seen as a sign of protection, but it could also carry an ominous connotation if the cat seemed to act strangely. The idea that a black cat crossing your path is an omen of bad luck has persisted for centuries, making its way into modern superstitions. While today we may not associate black cats with divine protection or curses in the same way the Vikings did, the lingering aura of mystery and magic surrounding these creatures is undeniable. Moreover, the Vikings' deep respect for cats as guardians and spiritual protectors laid the foundation for the special place cats hold in our homes today. While we no longer believe that cats can ward off evil spirits or bring divine favor, their calming presence continues to have a profound effect on us. Studies have shown that simply petting a cat can reduce stress, anxiety, and even lower blood pressure. In many ways, the Vikings' belief that cats could bring peace and harmony to the home continues to be validated by our modern experience with these creatures. Cats are still seen as bringers of comfort and serenity, providing emotional support and companionship to their owners. The Vikings may not have known about the physiological benefits of having a cat around, but their intuitive understanding of the cat's calming presence was spot on. But beyond the practical and emotional benefits, the Vikings' treatment of cats also paved the way for a greater understanding of the value of animals in society. The Vikings didn't just keep cats because they were useful or beautiful, they valued them for their spiritual significance. This respect for animals as spiritual beings is something that has carried through to modern times, particularly in cultures where animals are seen as sacred or imbued with special meaning. While our connection to animals may be less mystical than that of the Vikings, there's still a deep appreciation for the role animals play in our lives, whether they're companions, protectors, or even sources of inspiration. In Viking times, cats were often the silent guardians of the household, the calming presence amid the chaos of raids, farming, and daily life. Today, we still view cats as guardians of the home, whether they're keeping us company while we work, offering a comforting purr after a long day, or simply curling up beside us in bed at night. The idea that cats bring peace, luck, and protection remains deeply embedded in modern culture, much as it was for the Vikings. Interestingly, the Vikings' treatment of cats has also influenced the way they are represented in literature and popular culture. In many works of fiction, cats are portrayed as mystical or magical creatures, much like the Vikings saw them. They are often depicted as wise, independent, and otherworldly, much like Freya's divine felines. Whether in modern fantasy books, movies, or even in popular media, the image of the cat as a mystical being continues to draw inspiration from the Viking legends that have survived through the ages. For example, in the modern fantasy genre, we often see cats as companions to powerful sorcerers or magical creatures. In some stories, they are depicted as having mystical powers, guiding their human counterparts through dangerous adventures or protecting them from unseen forces. This portrayal is a direct echo of the Viking belief that cats had a connection to the divine. In these stories, cats are seen not just as animals, but as powerful beings that transcend the mortal realm and embody divine or magical forces. As we move forward in our exploration of Viking cats and their legacy, it's clear that the reverence the Vikings had for these creatures wasn't confined to their time alone. It has resonated throughout history, leaving its mark on modern culture and continuing to shape our perception of cats as magical, mystical, and ever-present symbols of protection, peace, and luck. To understand the modern connection to Viking cats, it's useful to remember that the Vikings saw cats as divine beings. Today, cats continue to play an important role in our lives, reminding us of the deep, often unspoken bond between humans and animals. Whether you're a Viking warrior or just someone looking for a little peace at the end of a long day, the humble cat remains a symbol of protection and divine favor, just as it was for the warriors of the past. As we move deeper into the Viking legacy of cats, it's important to reflect on how these animals transcended their immediate roles and became central figures in shaping the spiritual and cultural identity of Viking communities. These cats weren't just companions or protectors, they were emblems of Viking values, guiding forces in a world where the line between the mortal and spiritual realms was often blurred. The reverence and symbolism surrounding cats in Viking culture did more than influence superstitions or rituals. It shaped the very way the Vikings understood their world. At the heart of Viking society was a profound connection to the natural world, where every animal, every plant, and every force of nature had its place in the cosmic order. The Vikings were deeply spiritual people, and this spirituality wasn't confined to the gods alone. It extended to the everyday aspects of life. This is where cats fit into Viking belief, as guardians of both the physical and spiritual realms. It was widely believed that cats bridged the human and divine worlds, offering protection from evil spirits and securing the blessings of the gods. But their significance wasn't limited to just their spiritual associations. Their behavior and actions were integral to the Vikings' understanding of fate. The Vikings didn't just rely on cats for protection or spiritual guidance, they also looked to them for signs and omens. We've already touched on the belief that the behavior of a cat could foretell the success or failure of a raid or journey, but this practice went beyond mere superstition. It was an integral part of how the Vikings navigated the complexities of life. They believed that the gods communicated with them through signs, and cats, with their mysterious and independent nature, were thought to be particularly attuned to these divine messages. To see a cat behaving calmly was often interpreted as a sign of good fortune, while erratic behavior or a cat's sudden disappearance could be seen as a warning of impending misfortune. The belief in these omens connected the Vikings to a greater cosmic order and served as a constant reminder that their fate was shaped by forces beyond their control. This belief in the power of cats to communicate divine will wasn't just a passing notion, it was central to Viking identity. The Vikings saw themselves not as masters of their own fate, but as people who were constantly in dialogue with the gods. Cats, as symbols of Freya's protection and divine favor, served as intermediaries between the mortals and the divine. This relationship between the Viking people and their cats was not just one of mutual benefit, it was a spiritual exchange, where the gods imparted their blessings and protection through these sacred animals. The behavior of a cat wasn't just a quirk of nature, it was a message from the divine, telling the Vikings whether they were aligned with the will of the gods. Moreover, cats held a unique place in Viking folklore and storytelling. Much like other cultures that used animals as metaphors for human qualities, the Vikings incorporated cats into their sagas and myths as embodiments of certain virtues or spiritual truths. Cats were often depicted as wise and mysterious creatures, whose calmness and independence were symbolic of the Viking ideal of self-sufficiency and inner strength. They were seen as creatures that knew when to act and when to retreat, reflecting the values of patience, stealth, and calculated action that were so important to Viking warriors. In this sense, the cat was a model for how the Vikings saw themselves, not just as fierce warriors, but as people who were in tune with the rhythms of nature, who understood that power lay not only in strength, but in subtlety, patience, and timing. Interestingly, there is also a connection between the reverence of cats and the Viking understanding of fate and destiny. The concept of fate, or wird, was central to Viking belief. They believed that destiny was preordained by the gods, but that individuals could still shape their fate through courage, wisdom, and actions. Cats, as symbolic creatures tied to the divine, were believed to be in tune with this greater force of fate. A cat's actions were often seen as signs of the divine plan, a way for the gods to communicate their intentions to the people. In a way, cats embodied the unpredictability of fate itself, quiet and elusive, yet deeply powerful and filled with divine mystery. As we move from the mythological and spiritual dimensions to the more tangible aspects of Viking life, it's clear that the reverence for cats was not just confined to rituals and beliefs, it permeated the very structure of Viking society. Cats were valued not just for their connection to the gods, but for the role they played in the Viking household. As we've seen, cats were crucial for maintaining the safety and prosperity of the home. Their role in pest control was indispensable. Without cats, the Vikings' precious food stores would have been at risk. But beyond that, cats provided comfort and companionship, offering a calming presence in a world that was often harsh and unpredictable. In a culture that valued strength and endurance, the presence of a cat could also serve as a reminder of the importance of balance. While the Vikings were fierce warriors, they also recognized the need for moments of quiet and contemplation. The cat, with its independent yet graceful nature, represented this balance between strength and tranquility. It reminded the Vikings that, while they had to fight for survival, they also had to live in harmony with the natural world and the forces of fate. The cat's presence in the home served as a gentle counterpoint to the chaos of Viking life, offering not only protection but also peace, much like the gods they worshipped. As we reflect on the legacy of the Viking cat, it becomes clear that these animals were far more than mere pets. They were symbols of divine favor, protectors of the home, and guides to the afterlife. They embodied the values of patience, stealth, and wisdom that the Vikings held dear. They served as spiritual intermediaries, carrying messages from the gods and helping the Vikings navigate their relationship with fate and the divine. And most importantly, they were partners in the Viking journey, providing protection, comfort, and companionship in both life and death. As we enter the final chapter of our journey into the world of Viking cats, let's reflect on the lasting legacy these revered creatures have left behind. The Vikings' deep connection to their feline companions, their spiritual and symbolic roles, and their practical value have left an indelible mark on history. But perhaps more interesting than the past is how the influence of Viking cats continues to shape our modern-day culture, perceptions, and interactions with these remarkable animals. While centuries have passed since the Viking Age, the reverence for cats has endured, and in many ways, the way we view cats today still echoes the legacy of the Vikings. To start, we must recognize that the role of cats in Viking culture has influenced how we view cats in many different parts of the world today. Cats are often seen as mysterious, enigmatic creatures, symbols of independence, strength, and grace. This modern perception of cats is strikingly similar to how the Vikings viewed them. While the Vikings saw their cats as divine protectors, we still regard them as creatures that transcend the ordinary, with their quiet demeanor and aloof nature often associated with mystery and magic. In many ways, our fascination with cats can be traced back to the Viking reverence for these animals as sacred beings, linked to the divine and the supernatural. Perhaps one of the most striking legacies of Viking cats is their association with Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and war, who rode across the sky in a chariot pulled by two divine cats. This image of Freya's cats has left an enduring cultural footprint. Cats, especially in modern pagan or spiritual communities, are often associated with the divine feminine and the mysteries of the natural world. Many people today view cats as symbols of intuition, independence, and inner wisdom, qualities that are often linked to Freya herself. Just as the Vikings believed Freya's cats brought protection and good fortune, today's spiritual communities often see cats as guides to a deeper understanding of the self and the universe. In popular culture, the legacy of Viking cats can also be seen in the many depictions of cats as mystical, powerful beings. Whether in literature, film, or art, cats continue to be portrayed as creatures with supernatural abilities, capable of navigating between worlds. From ancient mythologies to modern fantasy, cats are often depicted as guardians of ancient secrets, protectors of powerful forces, and carriers of wisdom. This portrayal is undoubtedly influenced by the Vikings' belief that cats were messengers of the gods and divine protectors. The Vikings understood the quiet power of the cat, and this understanding has carried over into how cats are represented in today's stories, often as wise and mysterious creatures who walk the line between the physical and the spiritual. But the Vikings' influence on the way we view cats goes beyond the spiritual or mystical. Their practical value as pest controllers is something we still appreciate today. The role of cats in keeping homes, farms, and ships free from rodents is something that hasn't changed. Cats continue to serve a functional purpose in many homes and businesses around the world, proving their worth not just as companions, but as guardians of food supplies and protectors of the home. Whether in rural areas or urban spaces, cats still perform the same essential role they did for the Vikings, keeping pests at bay and ensuring that our living spaces remain safe and secure. On a more personal level, the connection between humans and cats remains strong. The bond between cats and their human companions is one of comfort, companionship, and mutual respect. While the Vikings may have seen their cats as divine protectors, today, we see them as emotional support animals, creatures that provide solace, reduce stress, and even improve mental health. The Viking belief that cats brought peace and protection to the home remains relevant today. In a world that can often be chaotic and unpredictable, the presence of a cat can be a calming and stabilizing force, much as it was for the Vikings when they returned from a long raid or a hard day of work. It's also worth noting how the Vikings' respect for animals, especially cats, laid the groundwork for modern-day attitudes toward animal rights and the value of animals in society. While the Vikings might not have had the same modern sensibilities about animal welfare, their deep reverence for cats reflects an early recognition of the importance of animals in human life. In many ways, The Vikings understood that humans and animals were connected in ways that transcended the physical realm. The belief that animals were spiritual beings, capable of influencing the course of events, speaks to a profound respect for the animal world that has influenced modern-day movements to protect animals and recognize their importance in our lives. The Vikings' treatment of cats also helps to explain the enduring popularity of cats as pets in modern times. In a world that's often full of stress and uncertainty, the cat remains a source of comfort and solace for millions of people. Cats, much like their Viking ancestors, offer a sense of security and protection to their owners. Their calming presence, independent nature, and occasional bursts of energy bring a balance to our lives, much as they did for the Vikings centuries ago. Whether they're curling up on our laps or playfully chasing after a toy, cats continue to offer companionship and emotional support, much as they did for their Viking masters. One of the more curious aspects of the Viking legacy of cats is their connection to the afterlife. In Viking burials, it wasn't uncommon for cats to be buried alongside their owners, a sign that the cat was not just a companion in life, but also a spiritual guide in death. Today, cats are still seen as guardians of the soul, and their presence is often comforting during times of loss or grief. While we may not bury our cats with the same reverence as the Vikings, the spiritual bond between humans and cats remains strong. The idea that a cat could help guide a soul to the afterlife is a beautiful metaphor for the role cats continue to play in our emotional lives. They are, in many ways, our quiet guides through life, offering companionship and love as we navigate the journey ahead. As we reflect on the legacy of Viking cats, it becomes clear that their influence has transcended time. From their sacred role as divine protectors to their modern-day status as beloved pets, cats have remained constant companions, offering comfort, protection, and spiritual guidance to those who welcome them into their homes. The Vikings' reverence for cats, their belief in the cat's divine power and significance, continues to shape the way we view these enigmatic creatures. Whether in mythology, popular culture, or our everyday lives, the legacy of Viking cats is alive and well, reminding us of the mysterious power these creatures have to shape our world. As we reflect on the enduring legacy of Viking cats, we begin to see the full extent of their influence on Viking society and how that influence persists today. The Vikings, with their fierce battles and explorations, were also a people who deeply revered the natural world, and their relationship with cats was a reflection of that reverence. These animals were not simply domesticated creatures, they were intertwined with the spiritual, the practical, and the cultural dimensions of Viking life. But as we continue to explore, it becomes clear that their legacy is more profound than we might initially think. The Vikings were a people deeply connected to the world around them, and animals played an essential role in that worldview. From their symbolic presence in Viking art and mythology to their practical function in keeping pests at bay, cats were much more than mere companions. Their significance was far-reaching, extending into the spiritual realms of Viking life and serving as intermediaries between the mortal and divine worlds. This belief in the spiritual connection between humans and animals, and particularly cats, is something that transcended time, influencing both ancient and modern societies. The continued reverence for cats in modern culture can be traced directly to the Vikings' spiritual beliefs. Today, cats are often seen as symbols of independence, mystery, and even power. Whether as mystical creatures in literature and film or as beloved pets in our homes, cats have maintained their association with the divine, the supernatural, and the unknown. The Vikings, who saw cats as manifestations of Freya's divine favor, would likely find it comforting to know that cats continue to carry with them that same aura of mystery and reverence. It's also worth noting the Vikings' unique perspective on the importance of balance between the physical and spiritual realms. While their society was built on the foundations of strength, war, and survival, they understood the significance of maintaining harmony with the natural world. Cats, in their graceful, elusive manner, were the perfect embodiment of that balance. They weren't just protectors of the home, they were spiritual guides, ensuring that the Vikings stayed connected to the divine forces that shaped their world. The role of the cat in Viking society was about much more than pest control. It was about protecting the sacred balance between the natural and spiritual worlds. As we move to the present day, the role of cats in human society has evolved, but their symbolic significance remains largely unchanged. Cats are still seen as independent creatures with a deep connection to the divine, with many cultures around the world regarding them as symbols of luck, protection, and spiritual guardianship. Whether in Western superstitions or Eastern beliefs, cats continue to be associated with mystical powers, much as the Vikings saw them as manifestations of Freya's divine favor. In Viking culture, the cat's role wasn't just symbolic, it was deeply embedded in the practical and social structure of Viking life. The Vikings lived in a world where survival was paramount, and the cat's role in keeping food stores safe from rats and pests was essential. But their connection to the divine elevated the cat's status. The idea that a cat could bring good fortune, keep evil spirits away, and even guide the souls of the dead speaks to the complex relationship Vikings had with these creatures. Cats weren't just part of the household. They were spiritual beings that held the power to influence the fate of the family and the community. The Vikings' belief that cats were essential to the success of their raids and the protection of their homes was reflected in their art, rituals, and everyday life. They saw these animals as sacred beings, symbols of Freya's protection and the divine order that governed the world. In modern times, we can still feel the impact of this belief. While we may no longer consult cats for omens before a battle or raid, we still view them as spiritual companions. Cats are often regarded as guardians of the home, providing comfort, protection, and emotional support to those who welcome them. The Viking view of cats as divine protectors also resonates with modern concepts of animal rights and the value of animals in our lives. The Vikings didn't just see their cats as pets, they recognized their importance as part of the divine cosmic order. This respect for animals as spiritual beings has influenced how we view animals today. While our modern understanding of animal welfare may differ from the Vikings' spiritual beliefs, the core idea, that animals play an integral role in the balance of life, remains relevant. The Vikings' reverence for cats was a precursor to our contemporary understanding of the deep bond between humans and animals. Reflecting on this, we can see how the Vikings' reverence for cats has shaped modern society in unexpected ways. The symbolism and importance of cats in Viking culture have transcended time, leaving an indelible mark on our culture, mythology, and even our relationships with animals. The Vikings may no longer walk among us, but their legacy lives on in the quiet purring of a cat curled up beside us, in the sense of comfort and protection that these animals bring into our lives. Today, cats still carry with them the essence of their Viking legacy. They are more than just pets, they are symbols of balance, protection, and divine favor. Whether they're curled up in the corner of a Viking-themed cafe or accompanying a modern-day warrior to battle the day's stresses, cats remain enduring symbols of the spiritual world, with a deep connection to the divine that dates back centuries. It's a connection that bridges the gap between the past and the present, reminding us of the Viking understanding that every creature, no matter how small, has its place in the cosmic order. So, as you sit back, relax, and reflect on the legacy of Viking cats, take a moment to appreciate the quiet strength, grace, and mystery that they continue to bring into our lives. Just as they were protectors and guides to the Vikings, they remain so today, offering us comfort, companionship, and a gentle reminder of the divine forces that shape our lives, both seen and unseen. As we approach the final moments of this immersive exploration into Viking cats, let's take a moment to reflect on the broader significance of the Viking relationship with these enigmatic creatures. Throughout this journey, we've uncovered layers of meaning, symbolism, and practicality that show just how integral cats were to Viking society. But beyond the spiritual and practical roles they played, the most profound takeaway from this story is how deeply the Vikings understood the interconnectedness of the physical and spiritual worlds. For the Vikings, every aspect of their life, from their battles to their harvests, from their spiritual beliefs to their everyday routines, was governed by the understanding that forces beyond the mortal realm shaped their fate. Cats were not just pets or even just spiritual protectors. They were guardians of this delicate balance, standing as symbols of divine favor, protection, and connection to the gods. The Vikings revered their cats not only for their ability to protect their homes and food stores but because they believed these animals embodied the mystical power of the gods themselves. It's easy for us today to see cats as household pets, beloved for their independence and companionship, but to understand the Viking reverence for cats is to see them as much more than mere animals. They were seen as sacred beings, intermediaries between the mortal world and the divine. They were symbols of Freya's favor, bringers of good fortune, and guardians of spiritual harmony. And it wasn't just about protecting the household or keeping rats at bay. Cats were woven into the very fabric of Viking culture, their presence elevating the ordinary to the divine. The connection between the Vikings and their cats also speaks to a larger worldview, one that recognized the profound spiritual significance of even the smallest and most seemingly mundane creatures. The Vikings understood that balance in life was key, and that every creature, no matter how small or quiet, played a vital role in maintaining that balance. Cats, with their stealthy movements, calm demeanor, and mysterious nature, embodied this ideal of balance perfectly. They were creatures of grace and power, embodying both the calm and the storm, and were treated with the respect due to sacred beings. Their role wasn't just in the home, but in the spiritual landscape, as creatures that bridged the gap between the living and the divine. This worldview, that the divine is present in the everyday, lives on today, particularly in the ways we view animals in our modern society. While we no longer look to cats for omens of battle or spiritual guidance in the same way the Vikings did, the legacy of their reverence for cats continues to shape how we view and treat these creatures. Today, cats are often seen as mystical and independent beings, much like how the Vikings viewed them. They continue to occupy a special place in our hearts, offering companionship, comfort, and an almost magical sense of calm, much as they did for the Vikings in their own homes. The Vikings' connection to cats also reflects a larger trend in our contemporary world, one that celebrates the special bond between humans and animals. Just as the Vikings recognized the importance of animals in their lives, we too recognize the profound impact that pets, particularly cats, have on our emotional and psychological well-being. Cats, through their gentle presence, still help us navigate the complexities of life, offering us comfort in times of stress and companionship when we feel lonely. Their quiet, mysterious ways are reminders that sometimes the most profound connections are the ones that require no words at all. The Viking reverence for cats was not just about treating them with affection, it was about understanding the deep connection between all living things and the divine. It was about recognizing that the forces of the universe were at work in the smallest of creatures, and that by honoring and respecting these creatures, one could maintain balance and harmony in their life. Cats were not just pets, they were sacred beings, channels of divine energy and protection, and the Vikings understood that their lives were intertwined with the natural world in ways that went beyond the physical. Cats were spiritual guardians, mediators between the gods and the people, and their legacy endures in the way we regard these animals today. And as we draw this journey to a close, it's worth acknowledging how the Viking connection to cats reminds us of the value of balance in our own lives. In a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming, cats provide us with a sense of calm and perspective. They teach us to appreciate the quiet moments, to find beauty in stillness, and to remember that, like the Vikings, we too are part of something larger, something that stretches beyond the mundane and into the spiritual. Just as the Vikings understood the importance of spiritual harmony, we too can find peace in the quiet presence of our feline companions, who continue to offer us their wisdom, protection, and guidance, much as they did for the warriors of old. In the end, the legacy of Viking cats is not just about the past. It's about how we continue to honor and value the animals in our lives, recognizing that they are more than just pets, they are partners in our journey, guardians of our homes and hearts, and symbolic of the spiritual forces that shape our world. So, as you sit quietly with your own cat, Remember the Vikings who revered these creatures for their grace, power, and mystical connection to the gods. The bond between humans and cats, much like the bond between mortals and the divine, transcends time, and it continues to shape our world today.